Retro.
What's up, guys? This is Daniel Logan, Boba Fett from Attack of the Clones, The Clone Wars, Book of Boba, Skywalker Saga game, and hopefully many more things in the Star Wars galaxy. You are listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Yep, this is the way I've spoken.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
It's going to be a bittersweet episode as we discuss the last 3 episodes of not only season 2, but all of Andor. So we got the finale here. Can't believe it was so fast. We just started this a few weeks ago, and here we are. But before we dive into that, Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are?
Sure thing, Dennis. And bittersweet is putting it mildly for sure. So we can be found very easily on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
Okay. The dish is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. Shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So again, this is episodes 10 through 12, which is the last 3 episodes of the season and the series. Episode 10 is called Make It Stop, which is funny in isolation, not in context. Episode 11 is Who Else Knows? Episode 12 is Jedha, Kyber, Erso. And we're going to start off like we've been doing with some non-spoiler discussion, and then we'll get into all the nitty-gritty details. So if you want to hear what we thought about this overall, hang around. And then if you haven't seen it, you can dash off and see it yourself afterward and then come back. But Jay, here we are. The series, the season, everything's concluded. What did you think about these final 3 episodes of Andor?
Yeah, here we are indeed. And just like the other episodes in this season, this is just top-notch television. Not just television, but just Star Wars storytelling in general. It really hit just the right balance of so many things. And the intensity of this show is, I just can't get over that we have Star Wars that is of this nature. And I can't even put my finger on how to exactly describe or define it, but it's so different, but it's so amazing at the same time. And you know, I'm so thankful that we got this. It's just such a gift, and it's one of those things that even people who are, I don't want to necessarily say non-Star Wars, but my husband, for example, you know, he's been watching it because he kind of has no choice in the matter. But there, we were able to watch the first episode on Tuesday night of the finale series. And then when I got home from work on Wednesday, we were talking about how we were going to try to figure out how to finish the rest of them. He's like, well, we still have 2 episodes of Andor to watch tonight. So I'm like, oh, I think somebody's a little invested.
Someone's a fan.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's got that type of a caliber of, you know, just you buy into it no matter what, because it's not just Star Wars. It's just good storytelling.
Yeah, indeed. So some of my over thoughts on this. Yes, I was very pleased with the way this went and how it wrapped up. And if you've been paying attention to what the showrunners have said about this show and where it goes, then you will not be surprised by where this ends. There will be a few surprises along the way for you, but we will address those in our spoiler portion of the discussion. One of the things that occurred to me when I finished wrapping this up is that as much as I was disappointed when they said that this was no longer going to be a 5-season series, but that, you know, the second season was going to jump ahead 1 year and they were just going to do, you know, with each 3 episodes, and that's how they were going to get through the remainder of their story. It really works this way. The storytelling was very, very tight. There was no wasted moments. Each 3 episodes was like getting a mini movie, or not actually a full feature length movie. And I'm thinking about it. And again, you got this tight storytelling that got us where we needed to go with those things. Could they have explored other issues more? Sure, they could. Absolutely. If every season was 12 episodes and we had 3 more of them, there would have been a whole lot more stuff to tell. But we got to focus on what was important here. And we got to see a lot of great things and a lot of great world building over this entire season. And this was a satisfying wrap up. And I really liked that we got to see Cassian evolve into the character we know in Rogue One. By the time that this was all over, we got to see some of our other favorites from Rogue One here, characters we've all met at this point in the series. And, it put them right in the right place for us to get into Rogue One. I was very, very eager. I've seen all these episodes except for the last episode, which I've only seen. I've seen them all twice, except for the last episode, which I've seen 1.5 times. I just didn't get to finish it before my rewatch. Didn't get to finish my rewatch before we recorded here tonight, and I'm looking forward to watching them again on this one. I think one of the things we talked about with season 1 of Andor is that it was hard to rewatch, not because it wasn't good. It's just because you had to sit down and invest yourself in it a lot more. And I think one of the great things about this is that this season is that they blended the action moments in a lot better so that you could just kind of sit down and watch that and then get up and go. And because there was such tight storytelling, you could pick back up without having to worry that, oh, I missed that conversation from 5 minutes ago, And
Right.
so, anyways, season 1 was good. Season 2 was superior, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And to your point about it being such tight storytelling, that is something that normally we hear people saying, "Oh, that was a filler episode, blah blah." Oh, there was no filler, not that
Nope.
there ever is, that
Mhm.
we necessarily don't agree that filler is something that we agree with, but this definitely did not have anything like that. And I never heard anybody talking about anything like that. So,
Yeah, the problem with the term filler when it applies to TV episodes is that it's gotten overused and the definition has warped. And there were series years and years ago that you would have filler episodes, which was they had an order for a 23, 24, 26 episode season and they ran out of ideas. And so they
mhm.
threw something together and put it out there. And it wasn't the greatest quality, wasn't the greatest storytelling. And so it's a filler episode to meet the contract, right? But it's come to mean, and it's been overused, where if there is a overarching story across a season and an episode deviates from that, they call it filler. Though that's
Mhm.
not the case at all. It's,
Right.
it can be its good story in its own right, and it's not filler. But anyway, I don't want to spend any more time on that because these 3 episodes deserve our attention and we got a lot to talk about here. And
Oh
so
yeah.
why don't we go ahead and move into the full spoiler portion of our discussion. And if you are leaving us now to go watch the episodes or finish watching the episodes, go do that and hurry back. And if not, you've been warned. Here we go. So I want to get something out of the way before we get into the conversation here because it bugged me. One of the things that they've been talking about, and Diego Luna and Tony Gilroy have mentioned this, is that this season will take us right into Rogue One.
Mhm.
And it does. No
Yeah.
disputing that. However, these last 3 episodes start 1 year before the Battle of Yavin, 1 BBY.
Mhm.
And Rogue One takes place days before the Battle of Yavin. And this is like a day or 2 before that. This is
Mhm.
not 1 BBY. This is like 5 days before the Battle of Yavin
Right.
in here.
Right.
And so it's a bit of a nitpick here, but I think the calendar doesn't make sense the way they've laid it out this way. And that doesn't prevent me from enjoying this, but it's not an entire year before the Battle of Yavin.
Mhm. Well, I think, to the point that we were making earlier, it was kind of out of necessity
Mm-hmm.
because in order for it to be able to get right to the events of Rogue One and to really have the impact that it needs to have, this is the way it needed to be done. But I get it. It would have been nice to have some of those other gaps filled in. And I will admit that it took me a second to get, my feet underneath me when it came to the timeline, because I was of the same mind that you were, in that I was expecting this to be, a year. And I thought, okay, well, each one of these is going to be maybe 3 months worth of, happenings.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last episode would take us up to Rogue One.
Yeah, see, I'm that wasn't even my expectation. I mean, I anticipated that each of these 3 episodes is going to tell a story that took place however many years before, and I wasn't necessarily expecting each episode to, like, here's this episode, then the next episode is 3 months later, blah blah blah, and then we get to the year. It's just that when it comes down to it, the title card before episode 10 should not have said 1 year later, 1 BBY. It should have been like nearly 2 years later, 5 days before the Battle of Yavin.
That's
And
fair.
and that's my only criticism on this, because they keep, at one point, Cassian's talking to was it Draven or Bale? I can't remember. And they ask him when was the last time he saw Luthen, and he's like, a year ago. And I'm like, well, was it really a year ago, or was it 2 years ago here? Because they've just been a little bit loose with what they're saying is a year before. I mean, this certainly takes place in the year before the Battle of Yavin, but anyway. Okay, I've wasted enough time on that. Let's move forward with the discussion, because again, lots of things to discuss. Episode 10 is called Make It Stop, and we have not been in the habit of discussing these episodes individually. I've just brought this one up because, to the extent any of these 3 episodes is self-contained, it's this one, because it goes so much into the backstory of Luthen and Keyla. So let's kind of start there. What has happened is that Dedra tracks down Luthen Rael. He sacrifices himself, and we'll get more into those details in just a second. And now Keyla is going to put him out of his misery at his hospital so he can't recover and spill all the secrets. But along the way, she's having all these flashbacks to their history. What did you think of the history between these 2 characters?
Well, I was trying to place what was going on with Luthen. Where would he have been at that time? Because Clay is probably, at the point in Andor, maybe around 30 years old. So it must have been, pre, Clone Wars era type thing. But where would he have been fighting? And then for her to just be this random orphan that just happened to be where he was, kind of made me wonder, okay, well, what happened to her? Nothing actually was said about that. At least I didn't catch anything. And so I saw a lot of people saying, well, what if Clea was Cassian's sister? And that's, the person that he ended up finding, because we never did have a resolution to that. Well,
Yeah.
I don't know about that. But at any rate, I'd always wondered how Clea and Luthen became so close that they worked together that way. And we had kind of speculated that, they kind of had this father-daughter relationship, but this really, really put that into perspective. And also to the point that when she says, am I your daughter? And he says, when it suits us, or when it suits me, when it works, kind of thing. So he never really was warm to her in any way, shape, or form. He trained her to be a survivor. He trained her to be smart and savvy, and that's exactly what she was, to the point where, eventually she almost ran the show. I mean, as much as Luthen was the master of all of these things, I mean, realistically, she was the one that was getting on to the communications and getting all these things done and kind of keeping everything in order and keeping Luthen in order. So I did appreciate learning about that history and learning about what she had to go through to create that history. And so, after you talk about how you felt about the whole thing, I definitely want to talk about that scene on Naboo. So getting back to what you asked me, what did you think about their situation and their relationship?
Well, to address a couple things you said, I mean, I'm not entirely certain when they first met. I get the feeling it was somewhere around the end of the Clone Wars, because in one of the next scenes we see in that flashback sequence, there's a number of citizens that are being rounded up to be put to death by Imperial firing squad. There's stormtroopers there that are doing the killing. And I don't think there's been a whole lot of time that's passed between that scene and when Kleya and Luthen found each other on there. I got the impression that Luthen was either in some sort of a, we have the Grand Army of the Republic, which is the clone troopers, but he either was in some sort of adjunct type of service for his own world fighting a battle somewhere, or this was post Clone Wars and he was involved in some skirmish as the Empire was mopping things up. Did you notice what his real last name was?
No, I didn't.
It's Lear. It's just it's Rail backwards in that.
Oh
so
my gosh, no, I didn't.
He was Sergeant Lear and wherever this outfit was that he was fighting with. But at any rate, and Kleya is not her real name either. At some point over the course of these flashbacks, she asked that question. It's like, so I'm your daughter now. And it's like, it's when it suits us because, it's kind of a mission by mission thing. Yeah. He wasn't the most warm of father figures there, but like to your point, he did teach her a bunch of things and he did like acknowledge how smart she was. Like when she did that negotiation, when they found that artifact and they wanted to sell it and they were trying to be sold by the dealer there. She's like, I'll give you 7. And he's like, well, I know it's worth 40, but it's, we're not going to get out of here for 20 because, whatever. So, I'll take that. And the person's like, but it's worth 7 now. And then she came back in, and she's like, no, it's worth 20. And then the other person's trying to haggle, like, she doesn't understand how this works. She goes, it's 20, it's everything. And it's fine. It's like, I'll give you 18 sold. And so, she could see how smart she was. And then Luthen complimented her right after that. And he did, you said you want to bring up what happened on Naboo. And that was a moment there, he was kind of putting it to her that if we're going to go forward with all this, these are the type of things we have to do. And she reached for the detonator to do it, but he spared her that in that moment. It was like, he still kind of protected, not that she's innocent, but what innocence she had left, he was sparing her that in that moment, which was kind of a fatherly type of a thing to do.
It was indeed. And, my question is though, what was the significance of that particular bombing? Do you know?
No, I don't. I'm not aware. I hadn't thought to look. I didn't have time to look it up to see if it was anything. I am assuming it was some sort of an Imperial presence there. And it was I don't know if it was necessary to any larger operation or he was doing it to make a point to her.
Okay.
What are your thoughts?
Fair enough. I didn't know. That's why I was trying to place it in the history. And I was thinking, oh, is there some sort of significant thing that happened on Naboo that I'm not remembering or that I don't know of?
It was nice to get another legacy planet though.
Heck
Out of
yeah.
this because, they tend to avoid them. I mean, we've had this season of Andor. We've had plenty of scenes on Coruscant. We got Yavin, which was cool. And now we got a scene on Naboo. And typically they've gone to new worlds in all these Star Wars shows on Disney Plus.
That's true. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then there is the meeting between Lonni and Luthen. And oh man, we find out a lot real quick there. And this grounds us how close we are to Rogue One right away on all this, because Lonni shows up on the park bench and he's talking to Luthen, and Lonnie's explaining that he's had Dedra Cole's code cert for over a year, and he went through her files and he discovered this, that the energy program the Empire has been doing for years is a sham. It's a cover for a weapon. And then, Gorman was important, Scarif's important, Kyber Christos, Galen, Erso, Jedha, and Krennic were like all the key words there. And it's like so many things are falling into place. But Lonni wants out, and he's trying to blackmail almost Luthen in a way to this. And then Luthen's up, and he also spills that Dedra is onto him, that she's going to be coming for him. And Luthen shoots him and leaves him there dead on the bench. What'd you think of all that?
Yeah, poor Lonnie. I feel bad for him because he was in a real pickle from the beginning. And I mean, obviously he made his bed and he knew what he was getting into with the rebellion and being a spy. But I mean, he was doing it for, I believe, to provide a better future for his family. And I guess in his own way, he did, even though his family's never going to know that for sure. But I just felt bad because, he mentioned that he had a wife and a child and that he wanted to get out for them. And so I wonder if that's part of the reason, though, that Luthen did shoot him, was just because the fact that he was afraid that having that attachment to his family could actually be more detrimental to the cause than not. You know what I mean?
Well, I think there's a couple things that are happening there. One, it is, think back to Tay Colma when Tay's showing up and talking about his financial difficulties and kind of going on about saying, hey, everything's, come up roses for the rebellion and for you, but not me so much, and there was this implied threat. Well, how did Luthen deal with that? He took Tay Colma out of the picture. Right. Yep. And now you got Luthen. He's like, I've got all this information. It's something you're going to know, but I want out. And so this is the second time. And Luthen is, the first time Luthen gave that great speech about, he's fighting for a sunrise he's never going to see. And of course that'll come to be here in a bit. But now he's got a guy that wants out and wants something from him. And when Luthen offers Yavin, he gets some pushback on that. And this was not unexpected because it's like Lonni became a liability at that point when he wanted out on this. If Lonni had been part of the team and maybe gone with Luthen's like, hey, we got to get back to your place and get rid of the evidence or whatever, maybe he survives on there. But I did kind of have that feeling. It's like, by Lonni being dead, does that protect his wife and daughter? And some of the dialogue that follows this, when the other ISB agents are gathered, like, they're aware of the wife and daughter and all of this. And I couldn't help but think that they were in danger because they knew, the ISB knew that Lonni was involved with what was going on and all of this. So as much as I'd like to think that there was some spark of altruism for them on Luthen's part that doesn't make this such a cold-blooded killing, I'm leaning very much against it.
Yeah.
After consideration.
Right. And I mean, and Mon was onto something when she was fearful of Luthen because she called him out on that and said, you had no problem taking out my childhood friend. What happens to me? So, yeah.
And then we get the showdown at Luthen's antiquity shop. Yeah. Dedra Meero shows up at the door and they go through this whole pantomime. I mean, he knows who she is. She knows who he is. And, she's talking about, like, are they all real? And he's like, well, there's only two that we're curious about. And then she pulls out the path, the star path that was from season 1 and puts it up there to get his reaction. And he ultimately ends up stabbing himself. So he's already taken out the radio equipment, or a chunk of it, to try and cover the tracks. And now he realized that he's a liability. So he has to go. At least he plays fair when it comes down to that. If Lonni was, if Tay Colma was, he now recognizes he is. And so he's prepared to sacrifice himself for the cause. But what did you think of this confrontation?
Well, first of all, I did not see that coming, that Luthen would do that to himself. But in the end, it makes sense for his character. And it makes sense that, his ultimate sacrifice would be himself. And the fact that Dedra, she's always been so obsessive, first with Cassian and then with Luthen, and kind of both, interchangeably. And she basically was, having that aha moment, like, I caught you and this is it. And she called him Axis, which I didn't realize. I guess maybe I just never put 2 and 2 together, that Axis was kind of his code name, or was that basically the name that the ISB gave him? But then I was thinking to myself, okay, Axis and Fulcrum. Aha, like an axis is a little different, obviously. Like an axis is more where something spins, where a fulcrum is more of a balance point, like a pivot point. But I thought, I wonder if that's where they ended up, coming up with that name, that code name Fulcrum was from the name Axis.
Yeah, but, possibly.
Yeah, but this was pretty intense.
Yeah, the self-sacrifice wasn't surprising to me simply because of the lines that preceded this entire thing when Luthen and Keyla were meeting, and this is after he's got the information and he passes it on to her, talking about Jedha, Kyber crystals, Scarif, Galen Erso, he's like, repeat those back. He wanted to make sure that she got all the key points and stuff like that. And so that she remembered. And then he was going back to the store and she said, no, I can do it. I can do it quicker. And he's like, no, it's got to be me. You've got to get that message across. And then she says, promise me if it doesn't look perfect, you won't engage. Well, actually that was even before her meeting with Lonni, I think. And then he says, I think we used up all the perfect.
Yeah.
So he kind of foresaw that this was, he wasn't coming back from all of this there. And so, yeah, he made that tough choice. I got to tell you, Dedra's ego got the best of her in this situation. Yeah. She could, if she'd walked in and just stunned him off the bit, but she had to do the big confrontation. She's she's talking about how she's dreamt of this moment, 1,000 times and how this was going to go down. And then she had to, put the Starpath drive up there to get his reaction, just to see the look on his face. And then by the time, she's kind of done gloating and she's noticed the smoke coming out of the communicator, he's already stabbed himself. And she's like yelling, if you don't, put your hands up, you'll be stunned. Too late. And, if she had just put her ego aside there, she would have had her prize.
Exactly. Yeah. Your overconfidence is your weakness, as Emperor Palpatine would say.
Yeah.
And then she freaked out, because she's like, no, he needs to stay alive. He needs to stay alive.
Oh, yeah. She asked for a med unit so that she could get him evacuated and get him saved. And it almost worked. If it wasn't for Kleya, who...
Yeah.
That was one heck of an infiltration.
Yes.
First off, did you notice the name of the hospital? The Lina Soh Medical Center?
I did not until I saw it on Instagram that someone had put that, and I thought, oh, I bet Dennis picked up on that right away.
Well, I just happened to pause it when there was an exterior shot, and I saw the name in Arabesh across the top. Because that's when I see Arabesh, I try to stop and watch it, unless I'm just not usually a first watch. But I didn't notice
High
that.
Republic, I love it. I love the High Republic tie. That is so awesome.
Mm-hmm. And then, she disguises her. Well, she breaks into the hospital. She uses her little lock picking device to open all those lockers until she finds a uniform. And then she's wheeling around that old alien, which looked like E.T.'s grandmother to me.
Somebody else said that too. It's funny.
And then, finally gets up there and then starts taking out ISB agents and stormtroopers until she gets to his room. And then, that was sad.
It was very sad.
We got all of those flashback scenes intermittently through this episode, but she didn't hesitate. She got in there and she just disconnected him, and then we saw him die right there. And she shed a tear, and then she got out.
Yeah, and I have to really take it off the acting of Skarsgård in that, because that was just absolutely incredible. And of course, that was how he would have wanted her to do it anyways. I mean, she was doing exactly what he would have wanted her to do. But again, to your point with all of the flashbacks, I think that's why it hit worse, because now we understood the depth of their relationship, whereas before we only speculated. And so this really hit home.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think from here on out, we're going to kind of jump around to the different storylines that are happening here. We've already brought up Dedra. Let's go ahead and finish her off. So things go very poorly for her after this. She is arrested by Supervisor Hirt. I can't remember how exactly you pronounce his name. I just kept seeing it in the closed captions. And is basically accused of spying for the rebels and gets confronted by Director Krennic. Yeah. And he is furious. This was such a great scene from Ben Mendelsohn. I mean, he's going on there and talking about, like, how long have you been in cahoots with Lonni Jung? And she's like, well, what are you talking about? And he's like, we found him that he'd accessed your files for 3 hours last night. And he accuses her being a scavenger. And she owns up to it. She's like, yeah, I'm a scavenger. I've been forced to be a scavenger. My job was to get access. Even though she'd been signed to the Death Star project, she still couldn't let access go. And so she had files that were sent to her accidentally, which she didn't report. She basically got an intel that she wasn't supposed to have and learned all about the Death Star. Her knowledge was not supposed to reach that part of the project. She was just responsible for getting the Gorman for the Empire there. And that she sealed her fate with all that.
She really did. And the way that Krennic oh gosh, it was so brutal. Like when he went behind her and just stuck his finger right at the top of her head. That
Mm-hmm.
was so degrading. And then again, Dedra gets manhandled, by somebody else. And first we saw it from Cyril and then we saw it from Krennic. But it made me think about that line in Rogue One where Tarkin says, about Krennic and his security breaches.
Right.
We thought it was just one time. Well, this is the other security breach that he must have been referring to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this notion, I mean, Dedra is this, like, I would call it a tragic character
Mhm.
if she was at all heroic in all of
Mhm.
this. But the fact of the matter is, she was a loyal agent of the Empire here.
Yes.
And then she threw away her own personal interests in service to this evil entity when it was all done. And so there's maybe a twinge of sympathy that I have for her, but really not much when it all comes down to it. I mean, okay, it was one thing when she disobeyed orders and, she went back to the access desk, which was Supervisor Hertz, uh, responsibility, kept him out of the loop as she went to arrest Luthen. And then she couldn't help herself but deliver that comeuppance to Luthen, which allowed him to take the drastic action he did and cost them the opportunity to keep all that stuff contained, or at
Mhm.
least get him in a position where they can interrogate him, find out where Yavin was, and put an into the Empire. Thank God they didn't. They didn't do that. But again, it's she got things to the finish line. She got past the finish line, and then she went too far in the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah, she is just a train wreck. One of those
Mhm.
kind of things where you don't want to look, but yet you can't look away. And I will say I did feel that twinge, of sympathy for her as well. And just when that last scene of her in Narkina 5, that was one
Yeah.
of the things that surprised me. And I was just like, oh my gosh. Because I thought maybe, at some point before this happened that she would end up on the Death Star and that she would actually blow up with the Death Star. That would
Oh,
be
okay.
that would
Yeah.
have been something that, would have been just her luck. But as it happens, she ends up in a prison camp instead.
Yeah. Well, as Mon Mothma said during her speech, the monster's going to come for us all
Yep.
on this, and it swallowed her whole
It
and
sure did.
put her in Narkina. So, yeah, I sat up very straight when I saw her there. She's all slouched over the bed, and then all of a sudden, you hear the on program thing, and then the lights go off, and it's like, wow,
Yeah.
that's just
Yeah.
crazy. So, okay, Yavin 4. Well, when we get there, we see Cassian, Melshi, and K2SO playing. It's not cards, but it's some sort of a version of dominoes, I guess. And Cassian and Melshi are having fun at K2SO's expense because it looks like Melshi's trying to bluff K2SO, but K2 is perplexed by this because they've played this like 837. He has a very precise number before,
Yes.
and Melshi's never done anything like this. And so he's trying to convince, like, you still have a moment to take that bet off. And, but Cassian and Melshi are really eating this up. So, what do you think about the kind of the interaction between these three?
Oh, this was fantastic. And, honestly, as you think, I've always thought that Cassian and K2 were together for a really long time. And obviously, from the story that we were told, it was a little less than I thought maybe it was. But they really created a relationship with not only each other, but with the rest of the base. And
Mm-hmm.
it's obvious that everybody just loves K2. And
Oh, yeah.
he is just one of the family for sure. And I just loved it. And quick aside too, when K2 goes to wake up Andor or Cassian at one point, and K2's like, I never, how does he say it? He says, I'm always perplexed or I'm always surprised at how humans wake up.
Mm-hmm.
So he's just completely enamored by the entire human process, essentially. But yeah, I mean, it just goes to show that they were all invested in each other more so than any droid or human typically is. But yet we see that a lot in Star Wars.
Yeah, this is kind of a refreshing scene to see because after the loss, with Bix leaving at the
Yeah.
end, of episode 9 that, and then we got to see K2SO be born, I guess is what they're saying on this at the same time. And so, yeah, I mean, he has these friends that are around now because Wilmon's kind of moved on and is spending his time with Drina there on Yavin. And so now Cassian's not alone. He's got Melshi and K2 to, find camaraderie with there. And so that was, and it's just hearing Alan Tudyk do K2SO and just all those reactions and the way that he performs that, it was so much fun.
So good. I can't get enough of K2.
But then Wilmon gets that signal from Kleya. She's gone through with everything. She's put Luthen out of his misery, and so they're safe. But now she needs an extraction, and they're using those old pulse codes. It's kind of like a Morse code type thing that they got going on. And he contacts her, and then this was interesting because Wilmon shows up and tells Cassian about it, but of course they're not getting a signal at the time. So there's these questions. Well, maybe that's really old. Maybe it malfunctioned or something. And then they start getting a signal again, and they take off out of there without getting any permission to do so. And it's K2SO's counting the number of orders that they've disobeyed and rules that they've broken as they do so.
And now it's 18.
Yes. It was so good. Fit it right in with his personality from Rogue One. But one of the things that comes up on this conversation is that, they're being very careful about what they say and who they're keeping this information from. I think is Wilmon or Melshi. I can't remember which one it is. It talks about, it's like, well, who are we keeping this information from? The obviously implication being the Empire. And the response is like everybody, because they know that the rebel command here on Yavin not going to let them go after Luthen. Of course, they don't know Luthen's already dead at this point. But, so they disobey orders. We've come to know Cassian as a bit of having a bit of an independent streak over the course of this series, and that he does a lot of things his own way, even though he's part of the bigger picture and stuff like that. And he has matured in a lot of ways. But the degree to which he's a wild card really surprised me, and especially in this context.
Well, for me, I don't think so much, just because the fact that, Cassian is loyal, maybe almost to a fault. This could have gone sideways for sure. But I feel like he owed it to find out what was going on, because he knew it had to be Luthen, or he didn't realize it was Kleya. But even though he and Luthen had kind of had a little bit of an uneven past before, that he was the whole reason why Cassian was where he was and why he sacrificed everything he did. Bix left for him to do this. So I think for some of that, it was almost that Cassian felt that in order to honor the fact that Bix had done this to sacrifice their relationship for this rebellion, that Cassian was going to do everything possible to make sure that he followed through.
True, but it wasn't like he was doing it for the rebellion. He was doing it for Luthen. He had no idea that there was Death Star type information in Luthen's possession or Kleya's possession at the time he got this message. And two, when you get to Rogue One, and after Jen fails to convince the Republic command to go to Scarif and find out what's going on with the Death Star there, and Cassian comes in and is like, they were never going to believe you, but I believe you, and we're with you. That whole speech he gives, which is fantastic. It comes off like such an act of rebellion in that part that perhaps he wasn't capable of up until that moment. Well, this completely recasts that as completely in character for Cassian. We're going to do an episode in a few weeks that kind of talks about how Andor season 2 has influenced our way we view Rogue One, but I want to watch Rogue One again before we do that. But
to talk about that, can I just say?
yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But so again, just the number of times that he disobeys Draven. He says back in the previous arc, it's like, as soon as I have to start getting permission is the day I leave. Well, then, when Bex left, he stuck around anyway. To your point, she made that sacrifice and left so that he would be committed to the rebellion there, because they had to win, as she put it there. And then, even later when he's confronting the Republic command, he's talking about how I made a choice to be with you all 2 years ago. And so again, putting that all aside here in this moment was, again, it's not that he went after Luthen that surprised me. It is the rogue nature in the way that he went after Luthen that I think surprises me in all of this. That things were so bad that he looked at the rebellion as adversaries in that moment, and that he had to go do it this way.
Well, they end up doing it again in Rogue One, so
True.
and that's how they became Rogue One.
That's exactly what I was saying there.
Yep,
You know, it's
yep.
like
So
in
it
that
sets
moment, it
that
seemed like,
premise, yep,
but yeah, it's very much in keeping with him there.
for sure.
But so they get there to Coruscant, and we get that whole showdown at the safe house. I love this scene. This was amazing.
Oh, yeah.
The Terminator has nothing on K2SO.
Oh my gosh. It's so funny you say that because Colby Wan said the exact same thing. He's like,
Did
"Who
he
needs
really?
a Terminator?" Yes, he said the exact same thing. And can I just say really quickly
Mhm.
that line that KT throws out when they're going to Coruscant? He's like, "I've been to Coruscant. I was in a parade there once. I saw the Emperor." It's like, oh my gosh. I love the fact that he was able to retain his memories,
Mhm.
but yet continue to, be him reprogrammed. He's almost like IG-11 in a lot of ways, but
Yeah,
even
he's just so
better.
matter of fact about things.
Yes,
It's
yes.
the same way he introduces himself to Jen in Rogue One. It's like, my name's
Mhm.
K2SO. I'm an Imperial droid. I mean,
Yes,
it's it's
so
just like,
almost childlike in a way.
right. And then and then like when they're on the way back from Coruscant, and says something along the lines of, they know they're in danger, they could get shot down, and K2SO is like, I'm going to tell them I was kidnapped.
Mhm.
He's
Yeah.
got some of the best. It's not by itself in isolation. That's not a fantastic line, but in context, it's hilarious. So
Oh, it's so good. So good.
yeah,
And Alan Tudyk just delivers it so well.
right. But then back to the safe house here. I major props for the way they shot this. They scripted it. They paced the whole thing out.
Oh, yeah.
It was kind of funny. They're trapped in their safe house room, and they Melshi had gone out to the corridor, and that there the ISB agents were, and they tell him to freeze, and he jumps back in, and then Melshi goes to close the door, and Cassian says, "No, don't do that because we'll be trapped." And Melshi's kind of like, "What are you talking about? We're trapped either way." He's like,
Mhm.
"How else are we going to get out?" And then they ask Claire, and she's like, "It's like, yeah, there's no way out, but it'll take too long there." And one of the things I thought was fantastic is kind of this cue. They do it like 3 times in this episode, or actually it's across the last 2 episodes. You hear K2SO before you see him. It's the clomping of his feet.
Yes. So good.
And yeah, and so you just kind of like, here comes something off screen. And then the Imperials always assumed it was a KX droid sent to help them
Mhm.
until K2SO was like throwing them around.
Mhm. Like little rag dolls. That's
Yeah,
for sure. Now, who was the agent that was with the team?
that was
Was
her. That was
That
the
was her,
supervisor.
because
Yeah.
it must have been Hiet or something, because I kept thinking that they said Piet, and I
No.
thought, "Oh my gosh, is this like Admiral Piet?" And then when he was used as a human shield by K2, then I was like, "Nope, that can't possibly be the same
No,
guy."
not him.
He's
No,
a
it was
little Swiss
this.
cheesy.
Yeah, it was the same guy. It's that same supervisor that arrested Dedra, who had the access desk. He was closing
Yeah.
in on the conclusion of his mission, which was to find, Axis shifted between being Luthen and Cassian as far as the ISB was concerned, because they were both involved in the things that the Axis desk was looking into, which
Mhm.
was the theft of the Star Path and other things that were being funneled back to Coruscant through these, this black market type situation that they had going on. And so here
Yeah.
he was on the verge of wrapping it all up. If they had been successful there, again, the rebellion never gets put onto the whole Death Star situation.
Yeah. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, I
Finish
was
your
just to
thought.
say, because they get back, and we haven't even talked about the confrontation with the Rebel Council there. But when it's over, Tivik, who's part of Saw Gerrera's crew, is calling for Cassian Andor this entire
Mhm.
time, and he wouldn't speak with anybody else.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it occurred to me too, as you were just saying that as well, that it was that conversation that Dedra had with, what did you call him? Hiet
Hurt,
or
hurt,
Hurt?
something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's
And she said,
Heert.
okay, Hirt
Yeah.
or whatever.
Mhm.
And she says, you can have all the glory. And he's like, I don't want the glory.
Mhm.
And then eventually, Dedra is the one that takes the fall for all of it. Well, he
Yeah.
did too, but
Well, he got obliterated. But
right.
the thing is that Krennic and Partagaz were in that ISB control room, and they were talking to him, and it's kind of like, I can't remember exactly how Krennic said it, but it was like, imagine the death march that you're going to be on if you're not successful here. I mean, it really
Mhm.
was a do or die situation for him. And so he had to be successful, or he was not coming back. So I'm looking it up on IMDb. Jacob James Beswick played this supervisor, and the last name is spelled Heert. So
Okay.
Hurt,
Okay.
Hurt or Hurt. I think they pronounced it Hurt, but
Tomato, tomato. Yes.
indeed.
Speaking of do or die, how
Mhm.
about Partagaz? Oh my gosh.
Mhm.
That was awful. And the thing of it is that who was the supervisor that walked out of the room? I can't remember his name, but he knew it was gonna happen
Oh yeah.
because he just stood there, and then when you hear the shot and the stormtroopers go to move, he just, like, casually puts his hand up, like, "Nope, don't
Mhm.
move. It's fine." Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, failure falls up the chain on this. It was this. He knew about the Death Star, and the last scene that Partagaz had with Krennic. Krennic basically said, I was doing Scarif 2 hours ago. I'm leaving. I can't protect his. I guess his first name is Lonni. Lonni Partagaz is like, I can't
Mhm.
protect you, Lonni. He's like, as much it was a do or die for Hurt, it was also for Partagaz. And
Yes.
all these accusations of being rebel sympathizers were going to follow everyone that failed if they didn't
Mhm.
stop them there. And the only way to, if they got away, then the accusation was going to be that you're a rebel sympathizer, a rebel agent, and you let them get away.
Right.
And Partagaz knew that he had nowhere else to go with this, and rather than find himself in Dedra's position, he's an old man. How long is he going to last on Narkina? He took
Mhm.
that path out.
Yeah, yeah, that's so intense. Oh my
Mhm.
gosh. Whew.
So they're successful. K2SO destroys everything and gets them out of the safe house. And then they get back to Yavin. They all nearly get shot down because they're not identifying themselves. But Draven's kind of as hard as he can be, as we've seen him in other episodes of Andor, and then as we see him in Rogue One, he also has more than his fair share of common sense about
Mhm.
everything when it comes to this. Now, he did blow that when he sent the X-Wings to Edu in Rogue One, but in
Right.
this moment, he's like, yeah, Cassian broke the rules. Yeah, he's coming back, send up the X-Wings, but let's not be rash. I'm paraphrasing, of course, on
Sure.
all this. But, you know, I love that scene. Admiral Radis, we got to see Radis in this episode.
Yes.
They're out in the control room, and Radis is like, well, just be glad that Merrick isn't here. He'd fly an X-Wing up there and shoot him
Right.
down himself. Radis is so cool. I love
He
him in Rogue
is.
One. It's just kind of like, when Jen's making her pitch, she's like, I say we fight. He's just like,
Right.
take
Oh, so
action.
good.
And they picked up right where they left off with that character.
Yeah, it was absolutely perfect, and I'm so
Mm.
glad that they gave him more screen time,
Mhm.
and we got to see him in action a little bit more because it just gives that presence of his in Rogue One just even more gravity, I think.
Mhm. Indeed. And then like during the meeting with the council, it's like, well, where did we get this information? Clea. Who's Clea?
Who's
Just,
Claire? Yeah,
you know,
that was
it's
so
just
good.
he just kind of he's not quiet about anything. He knows how to talk one way. And
Yep. Not
gets it
much of
all
a
out there.
filter, that guy, but that's
Mm,
okay.
right.
So speaking of the council, I know we see them in Rogue One, but who are those two people that are there with Mon and with Bail?
Yeah, so we've got okay, the council's got Mon and Bale, Radis is on it, Jan
Right.
Dodonna is on it, General Merrick is part of it,
Mhm.
and then we've got these other, I believe they're former senators, but I don't know their names, and I'm sure if we looked at the credits we could figure that out. But um man,
So I'm assuming they're part of that uh, delegation of 2000 question mark with Mon?
yeah, I mean, I assume that's where they came from over the long haul. But
Uh-huh. But they're
See, we've
just as
got
annoying in this
Senator
as they were
Pamelo
in
and
Rogue One.
yeah, it's Senator Pamelo and Senator Noor Jabel
Okay.
are the two there, and yeah, we saw them in Rogue One as part of this. And I mean, I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt on this because we see in Rogue One where they get all this information about the Death Star from Jen Erso, and they don't believe it, but they just got this, and we now know that this is not Jen's not the first time they were hearing any of this. They heard it from Cassian because that's
Yeah.
what Luthen and Keyla had, but it's like they let their disdain for Luthen get in the way of doing the smart thing, which is go check it out. You don't have to send an entire task force to Jedha, but go check this out, run it down. And Draven's got people that have been infiltrating Saw Gerrera's organization. So there's got to be something to this. I mean, there's all these coincidences lining up, and it's just like, well, we think that they could have been working Luthen on this. And I mean, even Bail was annoying me with all of this.
I agree. And it's like they were just antagonizing the entire situation, but I loved how Cassian threw it right back to them. And he totally goes to bat for Luthen and is like, I don't know, it's insulting. He has given so much to this rebellion. You people have not even given a fraction of a sacrifice to this. And of course they didn't like hearing that, but I think that Mon really appreciated Cassian saying that too, because she knew Luthen very well.
Right. And she didn't particularly like Luthen when it came down to it. They worked together. They were the two big architects behind the rebellion there. But Luthen is responsible for her still being alive.
Right.
Luthen made it possible for her to give that speech and get out and get to Yavin. And so Luthen, she may not like him, especially when it comes to things like the take home and stuff like that, but she understands what he's worth, what he meant to the rebellion there. And the rest of them are just like, no, he's hard to work with. So why can we believe him?
I just want to brush him off. I so loved how Cassian was like, yeah, and I was the one that got Mon Mothma out of the Senate, and then Bail goes, yeah, duly noted. That was so good.
I really like Benjamin Bratt as Bail Organa here. I mean, it would have been awesome if they had Jimmy Smits to come back for the role, but in the way that Bail was this season, which was not Leia's dad, I thought Benjamin was perfect for it. Bail Organa has been good every time he's played Bail Organa. Jimmy Smits has been good every time he played Bail Organa as well, but he was especially good being Bail Organa, father to Leia Organa.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And that's not to say Benjamin Bratt couldn't have done it, but there was just something fatherly about Jimmy that I think really worked well in those scenes.
No, I agree.
I also kind of like, they had to convince Clea to come to Yavin in the first place. And I don't know that she and Cassian were ever close until they lost Luthen. And it's kind of like Cassian seems to be concerned about Clea's well-being, partly because they've been working together for so many years, but also just kind of like a shared grief, and Wilman, he goes and gives Wilman a hug over this. But as much as he wants to check in with Clea about her health after, she hit her head after that stun grenade went off, it's also kind of like she's still grieving and she needs somebody. And of course she gets some relief, gets a chance to mourn a little bit with Vel later in the episode. But, Cassian's doing the humane thing. And after Bail confines him to quarters, he asks permission to go to the infirmary before anybody can say anything. Mon Mothma bolts right out of her chair and says, "Granted." I really appreciated that.
Yes, I agree. And why do you think that Clea took herself off of the medical devices and just started roaming? Like, what do you think the reason for that was?
Well, a couple of reasons. Just like Cassian and everybody else, the rebellion is full of incredibly stubborn people. And so there's one, she's like,
True.
I'm feeling better. I don't need this machine. Two, she's still grieving. She did not want to come to Yavin. Yavin represents the this frustration. These people resent Luthen Rael, but as Cassian points out, it's like none of this would be possible if we didn't have Luthen here. And so she's now kind of in the heart of this beast that represents this disdain for Luthen Rael, who was a father figure for her. And so
Mhm.
just kind of like lying there is not doing her any good. She has to get up and get out. And maybe she just would have wandered off in the jungle if she hadn't run into Devel through
Yeah,
all of this.
I know.
But
I wondered that. I was like, where is she going exactly?
yeah, but then she, this was all this was a huge blow to her. And Clay was a character that got screen time in season 1, but really came into her own here in season 2.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I really, really grew to like this character a lot more than I thought I was going to. Not that I
Mhm.
didn't think I was going to like her, but it just was one of those that I hate to say was like a side character, but she kind of was, and not anymore.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, she was not a major character in this in season 1 compared to what she was in season 2, and she essentially had a character arc.
She really did.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's that, and then of course we got the scene where Mon Mothma and Vel were comforting each other after learning of Luthen's death as well. So the show is called Andor, but the way it all ends, you almost could have called it Luthen,
Yeah.
because of the importance he had to everything, and what he could. These 2 seasons are almost about as much as his contribution to everything, and the way he set up the rebellion is Cassian's role in all of this. So
Mm-hmm. It's true.
okay. Of course, it does lead right into Rogue One. Basically, they've been receiving information or calls from Tivik, who is one of Saw Gerrera's men, from the Reign of Kafrene, and he only will talk to Cassian. So Cassian, ends this episode heading off to the Ring of Kafrene for that meeting. We got that shot of Dedra in prison that we talked about. Of course, Major Partagas has committed suicide. We get a shot of Director Krennic overlooking the final steps in the construction of the Death Star. And of course, we'll see the very final steps in Rogue One. And then we get a scene that I was not expecting at all. We go back to Lina Rao, and we find out that Bix Colleen is there, and she has a child that most
Hmm.
certainly was Cassian's.
Yep. Wow.
What do you think of
Talk
that?
about, well, I'll tell you, as soon as we got to Mina Rao, and I at first it didn't even register that, oh, okay, this is where Bix is, because of course I was seeing Bimo with his new little friend, just kind of running around there. And then when I saw Bix out in the field, and then of course with that little bundle of joy, I mean, the waterworks just started, and I thought, oh my gosh, he's never. It's kind of like a Hera and Cass and a Jason moment, with Kanan.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's never going to know that he had this little boy, and sort of the same thing. But I mean, hey, his legacy lives on, and oh gosh, it just ripped my heart out though.
Yeah, I like your comparison to the Hera and situation with Jason. The non-Star Wars comparison I was thinking of was the end of Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, when we find out that T'Challa,
Oh
had
yeah.
he kind of had a child, and so his legacy was going to live on
Mm-hmm.
in that case. So yeah, but I really like that scene. I really liked, and they didn't dwell on it. It was just that, and then moved on. And
Right.
it was, to your point, it was kind of, there's a touch of melancholy to it, because that Cassian is never going to meet this kid, and Bix has lost him now, but at least he's got, like you said, legacy. That's a perfect way to put it there.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I want to know what happens next. With that storyline. Obviously we know what happens next with Rogue One, and how cool was it to see Cassian walking through, Yavin with his Rogue One outfit
Yeah,
on, and just
yeah,
knowing that, oh my gosh, this is happening. Like, here we go.
yeah. I'm sure 3 or 5 years from now, we'll have a book that talks about Cassian's son, daughter, who whatever they ended up having, fighting in the
Yeah.
the resistance or something, or fighting for the resistance against the First Order. But that'd be fun. But we'll have to see.
Yes. Agreed.
Any other thoughts you want to share about these last 3 episodes of Andor before we wrap this up?
Oh gosh. I mean, there's just so many things that, we could talk about in terms
Mhm.
of like individual plot threads and just things that I appreciated. And again, I'd love to know what happened with Vel. And there's just so many people now. And that was one of the reasons why I loved Rogue One in the first place, was because it just really put it into perspective how much sacrifice went into getting those plans, and
Mhm.
where it brought us to in A New Hope. Even, here was Luke Skywalker talking about going to Tashi Station to pick up some power converters, and then but everything that came before it is just so impressive when you know how deep that goes.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of complexity and depth added to both Rogue One and A New Hope based on this
Yes.
series here, and I'm sad that it's over a little bit because
Me
it was such a
too.
good series. I mean, I this is of course after I was just saying about 30 or 40 minutes ago about how there's no wasted moments in this series because they did condense it from being 5 seasons to 2, and those last 4 seasons were given 3 episodes each, and it works really, really well. But to your point, I mean, where's the more Melshi stories? Where, where's an adventure with Cassian, K2SO, and Melshi off doing something? I mean, how much
Mhm.
fun would that have been? And that's not to say they couldn't go back and do something like that later if they wanted to. I just, Tony Gilroy is like, I've been working on Star Wars the last 10 years. I'm doing something else. And it doesn't look like Diego Luna's got any thought of coming back anytime soon either. So that's not to say, money won't talk and they can't be convinced at some point, but it really feels like this is it for these characters here.
Yeah.
And there's not, and based on what happens in Rogue One, the exception of characters like Vel and Clea and Bix and stuff like that, there is no more stories to tell for these characters.
Mhm.
We've reached their end. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
it's just we started off the episode saying it's bittersweet, and I'll revisit that again.
Yes, indeed. I do appreciate how Cassian was walking past Melshi was leading a troop, and it was the
Mm-hmm.
same team that ends up going with him to Scarif,
Yeah,
which I
including
thought was
the
a great touch.
what's the alien, the Sakala
Yes,
alien.
and that's how I figured out it was, I knew it was Melchi in the front, but then when I saw
Mm,
him, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's the whole troop."
yep, yep. Those are the ones that head off and don't come back. All right.
Yep.
All right, well, that'll do it. This is not the end of our discussion of Andor. We will be picking it up in a couple of weeks. We've just got to get through some other content. We've got more Tales of the Underworld to get through, more Light and Magic we need to discuss, but we will come back to this and discuss it again after we've had a chance to watch Rogue One and be on the lookout for that. And who knows, we may find some other opportunities to talk about this series sooner rather than later, but we'll see.
Mhm.
But with that, I want to just thank you all again for watching the episode. And if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the podcast, and you'll get all of our future episodes, whether we're covering Andor or Clone Wars or Ahsoka Season 2, the new movies that are coming out. That'll be downloaded to your podcatcher automatically for you. You know how podcasts work. You've been listening to this. And once you've done that, we would appreciate it if you could rate and review the show. That helps us out immensely with others finding what we're up to. And if you want to find even more podcast artists beyond what you've got available on your podcatcher, head over to retrozapp.com, where you can find the entire network of shows, including Agency Old Case Files, Animaniacast, Brews and Blasters, Dork Layers, Doomcast, Enjoy Stuff, Love, Death, and Robots, plus Superhero Suite and Work Trails. So Superhero Suite really recently just did a really good review of Thunderbolts. So go check that out if you haven't done
Nice.
so. Jay, remind everybody what those social media contacts are one more time and where else we have set up shop on the internet.
Absolutely. And I love the line, we have friends everywhere. So if you would like to be our friend on Instagram or Facebook, head over to both of those and you can look us up at Podcast Stardust. And we also have our Pinterest pages with lots and lots of ideas for everything Star Wars. And then we also have our 2 YouTube channels. So you can check us out at the traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music. And we would love it if you would subscribe to both of those and share those out with your friends. And those also do support interaction. So if you want to let us know what you thought of Andor or anything else, head over to those. And then we also have a TeePublic store. So if you are in need of some new Podcast Stardust swag, or you would just like to refresh your wardrobe for the summer, there's tons of apparel over there as well as home goods. And you can hit up the link in our show notes. And if you do happen to pick anything up, just know that every single one of those purchases does help to support the show.
Okay, you want to remind everybody what's going on in cosplay?
Sure. So I just actually last weekend was fortunate enough to be a featured cosplay guest at a Sweets and Geeks convention here in Northeast Ohio, and I had tons of fun. I got to help judge the cosplay contest. I had my own table and just got to interact with a lot of people and just have a lot of fun reconnecting with other cosplayers and people that I know, through cosplay. So if you want to check out all of those adventures as well as everything else that I'm up to, you can do that on Instagram at j.snipscosplay.
All right. So upcoming on the show on Monday, we've had to shake up the schedule a little bit because there just wasn't enough news to do a news episode. So we are going to get back into our usual weekly schedule. by shifting news to Friday next week. But fear not, there will still be an episode on Monday. We'll be getting into some Revenge of the Sith trivia. And got a lot of fun questions coming up for that, so make sure you don't miss it. And then on Wednesday, it is the May edition of World Between Worlds, where Jay rounds up Star Wars fashion and lifestyle product finds. With all that said, all that's left for me to say is thanks for listening to episode 887 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great weekend, and until next time, may the Force